share my screen and then start some slides and some videos. Here we go. So we're going to talk about a day out in the boat with the dolphins, which actually Robin Malcolm, who's online as well, joined us last summer to do. And Steve Dawson and myself started doing this in 1984 when we were about 25 years old, so about 35 years ago now. And this inflatable you see at the bottom there was our first research vessel. And the combi van that we used to tow it, you can see the inside of that combi van. You can see me working at the table inside it there. This little video at the bottom left is taken with a GoPro on a window washing pole. And a friend of mine, Brian Parvo, connected a cable up to the back of the GoPro. And then that goes up to a pair of goggles. So you can actually see what's going on underwater, which is really handy while you're doing this kind of video. And one of the reasons we do this is that we have several hundred dolphins that we can recognize from their dorsal fins. And for some of those, we already know if it's male or female, but for some, we don't know that. And so we want to basically have a look at their belly and see which one is male, which one is female. This little video here at the bottom left again was taken in Goffs Bay at Banks Peninsula this summer. And it was done using a small drone, a Mavic drone. And the main reason for taking this video is to find out how many calves are in those dolphin groups, which is really important for finding out about their reproductive rate. And so you can see the boat at the bottom left here. So the dolphins are swimming around the boat, and this is the boat itself. And so on the console of that boat, we have a depth sounder, a GPS, and various other equipment, and this little palm top computer. So we type into that how many dolphins were in the group, how many calves were in the group, but taking the video as well gives us a double check on did we miss any calves, and gives us a better indication of how many calves are in those groups and therefore how fast the dolphins can breed. This little video here was taken by Max Harvey at Porpoise Bay, where he is doing his master's research. You will see him in the video at some point. There is some lovely music playing in the background, but Max has written to the band who made that music and hasn't heard back from them yet with permission, so I've just turned off the music. And you can see Max's narration, the comments he's put on this is Max himself here with Will Raymond in the background. Will Raymond is his main supervisor. So at Otago University now, there's Steve Dawson, myself, and Will Raymond are the lecturers, and then we have a team of, at any one time, a dozen or 15 or so students, many of whom are working on Hector's dolphin, but some are also working on sperm whales and right whales and other things. So Max is doing a project for the Department of Conservation, finding out how many dolphins live in Porpoise Bay, which is an update on an earlier population estimate for Porpoise Bay that Will Raymond did with his partner Trudy. Here they are collecting a hydrophone called a teapot. And he's also looking at the impacts of tourism in Porpoise Bay as well. Yeah. So there's Max looking studiously at a thermometer to see what the water temperature was. We took the marine mammal course to Porpoise Bay as well this summer, just before, a couple of weeks before the lockdown. So we took 15 students down there, had a really lovely day, loads of dolphins, loads of people walking on the beach and watching the dolphins, swimming with the dolphins out in paddle boards. That's a bottlenose dolphin, not a Hector's dolphin there. And there's some New Zealand sea lions that also visit that same area. Thank you, Max. Great job. So there were some bottlenose dolphins sneaking into that video, not just Hector's dolphins. And if you see dolphins in New Zealand waters, then they'll usually be one of these 4 species. So they might be common dolphins or dusky dolphins, both of which are about human size, about 1.8, nearly 2 meters long. Or they might be bottlenose dolphins, which you saw in the video, which are huge, have the girth of a horse. And if you see a really small dolphin, especially if it's got this very strange shaped dorsal fin, this rounded dorsal fin, looks like a Mickey Mouse ear stuck on its back, then for sure that's a Hector's dolphin. And there are actually 4 of these very special little dolphins in the world. So this is the genus, the group of dolphins that Hector's dolphin belongs to. And they are all found in very small populations with a very limited distribution. So Commerson's dolphin's the only one that's found in 2 different places. The other 3, Hector's included, are all found in just one part of the world in small populations. So that makes them vulnerable already. Their low reproductive rate also, they have 1 calf every 2 to 4 years. And this very young calf, you can see these fetal folds, they're called, almost dents in the body, and they are formed because when the dolphin's just about to be born, it's way too big to sit inside its mother in a straight line, so they literally fold it up sort of on the right side for a while, and then they flip over to the left side for a while. And all dolphins have these kind of fetal folds, but Hector's dolphin are unusual in that after the folds are gone, there are still these coloration markings left. So you see these stripes on the side of the very young calves for almost a year, which is brilliant because that makes it really easy for us to tell, not just by the size, but also by the coloration, which of these calves have been born this year. Their behavior is really interesting as well. So they sometimes leap out of the water, sometimes several of them at the same time. They slap their tails on the water surface, they play with bits of seaweed. You'll see a little bit of video of that later. So they do lots of interesting things behavior-wise. This little video was taken by Faith Eccles, who's a statistics student.
On this particular day, we were doing a harvest survey. Once we had the boat ready and launched, we go straight out to the heads.
We stand on the side.
When we're at the survey starting point, we go on effort, looking for dolphins going at about 15 knots. On my very first day, we saw over 100 dolphins in one day. It was otherworldly. However, on an average day, sometimes we would only see a few dolphin groups, which are usually only 2 to 5 individuals per group. One day we didn't see any dolphins at all. When we see a dolphin group, we stop the boat and try to position ourselves in a way that we can photograph their dorsal fins close up and side on. It's a lot more difficult than it sounds. This is the main purpose of what we're doing the surveys for. Approximately 7% of dolphins have markings in their dorsal fins which are unique to them. By matching photos of the same dolphins from previous years, we can estimate various things such as population size, survival rate, and birth rate using some fancy math like this. When we've been on the water for about 3 to 4 hours, we usually stop for a food break, consisting of boiled eggs, crackers, jam sandwiches, and tea. Sometimes while we were eating, the dolphins would hang out with us and swim around the boat. Dolphins are very social. When you watch them, you can see that they're often just having fun. They do different types of jumps, play with seaweed, slap their tails on the water, swim upside down, and so much more. On our surveys, we also collected other data, which was for Will's master's thesis.
Good old Faith. So if you want to have another look at that video at any time, just click on that link there. And if you want to find out more, aside from looking at that video again, you could see if you can find this little book in a bookshop somewhere. You could have a look on the Whale and Dolphin Trust website, which has a normal website, this one here, and it also has a Facebook page. So let's see if you have any questions.
Great, thank you, Liz. Do you want to stop sharing your screen, and then
Yes, I will. Here we go.
Pop back to normal view.
Not that one. This one.
Great, thank you. That was really, really interesting and great to see what a day in the life of a dolphin researcher is like. We've got a few questions that have come through over the course of the event, so I'll read the first couple out, and then if anyone's got any others, please do drop them in the chat now and we can start putting them to Liz. The first one, when they're surveying dolphins, do they get to know different pods and specific dolphins? So can you actually pinpoint those ones?
Yeah, very much so. So not all of the dolphins are recognisable, but roughly 7% of the dolphins are recognisable from either nicks out of their dorsal fins, like the ones that you saw on the video, or some of them have coloration markings. So some of them have big white spots all over them, or dark markings that are called tattoo lesions, which literally look like a little circle of dots. And those are actually a skin disease, a viral skin disease. Anyway, there's about 7% of them that you can recognise from those kinds of natural markings. Some of them are caused by shark bites. Occasionally, dolphins will have markings on them that look like they've been caught in a fishing net and got out of that net again. That's rare, but that happens sometimes. And so from those dolphins, we look each year to see how many of those dolphins have disappeared this year, how many of the mature females have had a new calf, and where have they gone. So we look at their movements, their reproduction, their survival, and so on of those marked individuals.
Great, thanks, Liz. I've got another one. This is from Catherine. Are you concerned about the, really apologise for my pronunciation here because I'm not sure I'm going to get it right, trophic cascading effect of ocean acidification on these species?
Good question. Yeah, so right now, when you look at the impacts on Hector's dolphin, the main one is getting caught in fishing nets, gill nets and trawl nets. But once we have that problem solved, which the government is working on as we speak, then absolutely we're going to need to start looking at things like, is it anything bad going on with the fish species that they eat? So for example, is either fishing or pollution causing any changes in the fish ecosystem that might be making it harder for the dolphins to find their food? And also things like oil and gas. So I think all of us, including Catherine, were quite worried there for a while with all this seismic survey work, all this oil and gas exploration around New Zealand. And so it was with great relief to hear that apparently OMV has decided they are not now going to be drilling for oil in New Zealand waters. So there are quite a number of other potential impacts on these dolphins, which is quite common. So you would expect if you were studying kakapo or takahe or kiwi, that there might be, for example, habitat problems where their habitat's been destroyed. There might be predators eating the eggs out of the nest. There might be pollution issues. There might be climate change issues. So yes, for sure, in the medium to long term, we need to be looking at climate change, ocean acidification, how will this affect the diet of the dolphins? So acidification will affect none of the species that the dolphins eat directly. It will mostly affect species with shells. But of course, plankton will be, many plankton species and many snails will be affected, and those are the food of the fish that the dolphins eat. So it's kind of 2 or 3 steps removed from the dolphins, but for sure, we need to take care of the ocean environment. You can't save a dolphin without saving the place that it lives, the food that it eats, and everything connected with that dolphin.
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, it's really interesting to really get an understanding of how everything's so connected in the ocean. I think sometimes we think about one species specifically, but that species also has like a food chain, and you as one, you've had them all. This is from Greg. He's asked, what impact do different types of tourism, cruise ships and local dolphin watch boats have on these dolphins?
That's what Will Carome is studying. So Faith mentioned him in the video, and you saw him here and there in the video. So Faith was going out, she's a statistics student, and she was going out in the boat. The other woman that you saw, at one point she was winching in the boat on the trailer. That's Lindsay Wickman, who's doing her PhD on Hector's dolphins. And Will Carome is the guy that you saw in that video, and he's doing his master's on that particular topic. So Doc in Christchurch and Akaroa have come up with this project, and the funding comes from the tour operators as a levy. So the tour operators pay Doc money for being a tour operator and having a dolphin watching license or a dolphin swimming license. And some of that money gets spent on research. And so Will is looking at, you might remember in that video seeing this kind of zigzag searching pattern that we use, this standard search pattern for dolphins in Akaroa Harbour. So here's looking back through the old data from before the cruise ships started coming to Akaroa. So before the Christchurch earthquakes, those cruise ships, almost all of them, went to Lyttelton Port near Christchurch. And then when their port got really seriously damaged by the earthquakes, many of them, almost all of them, started coming to Akaroa Harbour. So for a while there, we would have 90 or so cruise ships visiting over a 3-month period. Some days there'd be 1 cruise ship, some days 2, occasionally 3 in the harbour at one time. What people often ask about is what happens to the sewage coming out of those ships, and for sure they don't dump it into the harbour. But I always thought that when they went to the next port, like Christchurch or Napier or somewhere like that, that they would connect a great big hose to the port and they would pump that sewage out and into the sewage scheme of that city. But no, they dump the sewage, it's treated, but not to what you would call drinking water quality, but that gets dumped when the ship is travelling at night further offshore. So that may be affecting the dolphins while the ship is inside the harbour, inside Akaroa Harbour. They often use their thrusters to keep the boat in one position, which makes it easier for the little boats that ferry the passengers from the ship to the wharf in Akaroa. Makes it easier for those little ferry boats. And so you often see quite a patch of stirred up muddy water around the cruise ship. That's one possible source of impact. There's noise, obviously. And then, of course, all those tourists get off that cruise ship, go into Akaroa, and some of those people go to the public toilets, or they go to a cafe and go to the toilet. And the Akaroa sewage scheme is just big enough to cope with the local residents and a few day trippers, but not 2,000 or more people coming off a cruise ship. So sometimes when you drive past that sewage works in the morning in the boat, it's like pretty smelly right offshore of the sewage station. So there's a number of possibilities. And so what Will is going to be doing is he's going back over all these old data on where the dolphins were inside the harbour from these zigzag surveys. And he's going to look, was the dolphin distribution in the harbour different before these cruise ships came? So he's got a before. He's got a during, because right now there's, until just recently, there were a lot of cruise ships coming. And now with COVID, we're going to have an after. So those students that you saw in the video were in on Banks Peninsula in French Farm when the lockdown was announced. And so they rushed back to Dunedin and are in lockdown here now. But as soon as they're allowed to go back to Banks Peninsula, either they or Steve and myself will go and collect 2 pieces of equipment that are still out there. So there's one camera on the hillside that is taking photographs every 2 minutes of boats, cruise ships and smaller boats in the harbour. And there's a sound recorder that's still there underwater that is recording whether it can hear any dolphins in the vicinity. So we're really interested to see how all of that has changed after lockdown.
Yeah, interesting. So I've got a message from Carly. Liz, how are the conservation statuses of the other 3 related species? Is there an explanation for the one that has the 2 quite distant distribution locations, or do they have a very wide distribution between those places?
The conservation status of those other 3 species is not all that well known. So the other 3 species have had much less research on them than Hector's dolphin, but all of them get caught in fishing nets where those fishing nets overlap with their distribution. Chilean dolphin, the one on the Chilean coastline, in the fjords and on the open coast of Chile, that one's had a really interesting history. So a few decades ago, literally fishing companies would send fishing boats into the Chilean fjords to catch crabs, and they would send them away with some bait, but not very much bait. And so the fishermen would catch dolphins and penguins and whatever they could lay their hands on, basically, and use it as crab bait. So Chilean dolphins had a pretty rough time with that. As I understand it, that is now much, much less of a problem, if not completely gone. The Chilean fjords also have loads of aquaculture in them, so large areas where Chilean dolphins used to roam now have very large salmon farms in those bays. So that's a concern. I think heavy-sides dolphin is probably doing relatively better. Out of those 4 species, that is probably the one that's doing relatively better. And Commerson's dolphin is also caught in fishing gear, just like Hector's dolphin. Now, there was another question there. Oh yes, why is Commerson's dolphin? So that one was found off the coast of Argentina and around the Kerguelen Islands, which is in the southern Indian Ocean, which is a mystery. I mean, what are they doing there? And how did they get from Argentina to the Kerguelen Islands? It's quite a distance, and there are no other kind of large land masses in the way there. So nobody knows what the answer is to those questions, but those dolphins at the Kerguelen grow to a slightly larger size than the ones in Argentina, and they keep their juvenile coloration a bit longer than the ones in Argentina. So the Commerson's dolphin, when they are born, the white areas are grey, and a bit like a grey horse or a white horse. They start grey and they become whiter and whiter, and in the Kerguelen they stay grey for a bit longer. And actually that length thing is also an issue with Maui dolphins around it. So Maui dolphin is the subspecies of Hector's dolphin around the North Island, and they also grow a little larger than the Hector's dolphins in the South Island. And they are in really serious trouble. So there are only 57 Maui dolphins left in the world. And everybody's got their fingers and toes and everything else crossed to hope that they will make it. And we're hoping that when COVID gets under control, the government is going to make a decision to better protect them. and Hector's dolphins. So there's been a threat management plan was released in 2019, and people wrote submissions in August 2019, and we're awaiting a decision. Was to have happened early this year, but I guess COVID's got in the way.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Liz. Okay, the next one. We have got a question from Daniel and his daughter. Can you make the fishermen stop putting out nets, and how?
We would dearly love to. I remember one time when we were at Banks Peninsula doing the fieldwork, this guy turned up on the front lawn with a small boat, a ski boat. They'd been water skiing, and they'd also been fishing. And so he sort of very sheepish and came to the front door and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I caught a dolphin in this gill net, and I thought I'd at least bring it to you because then you can study, find out what it's been eating and how fast they breed and so on." There are certain bits of information that you can only get from those autopsies. And at the end of the conversation, he said, "Oh, if there's anything I can do to stop, I just hate having killed this dolphin, it's horrible. What can I do to prevent this?" And we said, "Easy. Chuck out that gill net, get yourself a fishing rod, buy yourself a fish trap, use some other kind of hook and line method. There are loads of fishing methods. In fact, what some people do, recreational fishers, is they will still use that same gill net, but they stay with it. So they will either walk it out into the water or use a dinghy or a small boat to put the gill net out and then bring it back to the beach. And then a whole group of people, it's a nice kind of social activity after COVID, will pull that net in and catch flounder that way. So there's a million ways to fish, and we really don't need to be killing dolphins. Same with commercial fishing. There are loads of fishing methods that don't kill dolphins. It's really only nets, fishing nets, that do so.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I never realised that was how some people got round the problem with gill nets, that you could actually stay with it.
Yeah.
That's super interesting. We've got another question from Scott. I think you might have potentially covered this already, Liz, but do Hectors and Maui interbreed? Is there any interaction between those?
Apparently not. So there's been a lot of genetic research on Maui dolphin by people from Auckland University, including Scott Baker, Rebecca Hamner and others. And what they've found is that almost all of the Maui dolphins in the North Island have one particular haplotype, as they call it, one particular genetic type. And there are a few other types that are also found in the South Island. And then there are some dolphins that appear to be Hector's dolphins. They are genetically Hector's dolphin, not Maui dolphin, and they've seen them off the North Island. And so they've had a look to see, is it any sign of those two different types of dolphins, Maui dolphin and Hector's dolphin, interbreeding off the North Island? And apparently not. I don't know enough about genetics to know how confident we can be about that. But the current theory is that some Hector's dolphins are going up to the North Island, perhaps rescuing that Maui dolphin population. But so far there is no indication that they are interbreeding. I'm just going to pull the curtain so that I don't get overheated.
Yeah, no worries. Obviously, warmer you are.
Not usually a problem in Dunedin, but today it's a beautiful sunshiny day. Yeah, we've got to hang out some washing later on.
Yeah, it's a beautiful backdrop. Right, next question is just a follow-up from Scott as well. Do we have an estimate on population numbers? I'm not sure whether that's Maui or Hectors, so maybe you can give us a bit of an overview of both.
Sure. So Maui, the latest estimate is 57. And in 2004, we did a survey, Otago University did a survey, an aerial survey, and there were 111 then. And way back in the 1970s, before gill netting really got going, there were about 2,000 Maui dolphins. So they are way down, less than 10% of their former numbers. The Hectors dolphins in the South Island are somewhere around 30% of their former numbers. And pretty much everywhere around the South Island, including Maui's on the North Island as well, the most recent estimate, which was done by Ministry for Primary Industries, the numbers are about the same as our last survey in the late 90s. And so on the north coast, south coast, west coast of the South Island, the numbers are about the same. They're a bit lower in some places, and we appear to have lost in total about 1,000 Hectors dolphins from the South Island. On the east coast is a bit of a mystery. So on the east coast, the latest estimate is 5 times the previous estimate. And some of this could be explained by the most recent survey goes way further offshore. It went to 20 nautical miles offshore rather than 4 nautical miles, which was the previous one. And so you might have expected that number to almost double, but 5 times is just not making any sense. I won't bore you with the details unless you want me to as to what might be the causes of those differences. But so the jury is out about how many dolphins are there on the east coast of the South Island. And in total, we think about 10,000 Hectors dolphins around the South Island and well less than 100 in the North Island, the Maui dolphins.
Thanks, Liz. Pamela Jane has asked, of the 7% that are recognisable, is the data collected for forecasts based on this number only?
Sorry, I'm not quite sure what you mean by the data that's forecast.
I think it might have been a follow-up from the presentation, but maybe Pamela, you can clarify your question in the chat, and we'll just move on to something else while you do that.
I'll see if I can find it. No, there's loads of questions, which is great to see. Anyway, I'll let you ask this question.
Clarify. Yeah, that sounds good. We've got a question from Dan, who says, do you talk with fishermen on the ground or when you're out at sea doing your research? And how do you go about this?
Yes, we spend quite a lot of time talking with fishermen, some on the water, literally, some at the wharf or, somewhere else socially, and some of it at meetings. So when the Department of Conservation and Ministry of Fisheries did this threat management plan and put it out for public consultation last year, there was a series of meetings. Some of these were meetings with stakeholders, as they would call it. When I hear the word stakeholder, I always think of somebody holding a piece of steak, saying, here you are, I'm a stakeholder. That's not what they mean. Stakeholder as in someone who's got an interest, either a vested interest, an economic interest like fishermen, or so these meetings usually will have several different fishing representatives. Usually they try to have someone who does crayfishing, someone who does trawling, someone who uses gill nets, people who do different kinds of fishing. They'll usually have a recreational fishing representative, an iwi representative, someone from an NGO, from a conservation group, 1 or 2 scientists, etc. And so they had some of those kind of closed doors, invite-only meetings, and then they also had public meetings towards the end of that threat management plan process. Yeah, so all of those are good opportunities to talk with fishermen. In fact, at the very last or almost very last one of those public meetings I went to, there was a guide there who sadly I didn't get a chance to talk to him before he left, but he had caught 5 Hectors dolphins in 1 gill net off Banks Peninsula and quit that particular fishery. At that point, he said, "That's it. I'm not going to keep working in a fishery where I catch that many dolphins." And so he has now shifted to another fishery, still working in the fishing industry, but no longer using gill nets. And I would have loved to have had a chat with him, but yeah, I didn't get the chance. He left before I was finished talking with other people from government. Yeah, so we have quite a bit of time talking with fishermen.
Great, thank you. Are you aware that Christchurch City Council has a consent to release treated waste into Akaroa Harbour?
I wonder what that means. I imagine what that means is that the release of sewage, so the sewage work I mentioned at Akaroa that you sometimes go past in the boat in the morning and it's pretty whiffy, the final product after several forms of treatment, I think including UV light treatment, after that it goes into the harbour. And they're having a major discussion right now as to changing that. But that is probably what the question is about, is that that would be a consent. Presumably in the past it would have been to the Banks Peninsula District Council, and now that Akaroa is under Christchurch City Council, it would be to the City Council. And so there's been a lot of local discussion. I've been to a couple of meetings about this, where the Akaroa locals are trying to figure out another place that this treated sewage can go to, so that when it's gone through the sewage plant, it would go on a piece of land somewhere. And one of the local landowners is actually very happy for his land to be used for that. This is Jeff Hamilton, who runs one of the dolphin watching companies as well. And he has an easily big enough chunk of land that the sewage could be dumped on, but the trouble is it's too steep, and so the sewage would just run into the harbour, especially when it rains. So they haven't yet found a suitable place. It's one of those not in my backyard problems, you know, where nobody wants sewage being dumped on their piece of land. So they're struggling to find somewhere for that sewage end product to be dumped on land and on Banks Peninsula. And the only other option is a longer pipe out to the sea. That's usually the way we do it, isn't it? So in Dunedin, we've done the longer pipe solution. At some point, the pipe that comes out of the sewage scheme in Dunedin was lengthened, and now it gets pumped further out to sea. Not very helpful for the dolphins, but I guess it makes it less obvious to people.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. We've got time for probably one, maybe two more questions before the end, but just to repeat what I said before, we will follow up all the questions that you've dropped into the chat. So anyone who we don't get to, we will send you a follow-up email with all that information. So I'll go to a question from Yvonne Summers now, Liz. She's asked, what progress is being made, if any, with the government limiting the fishing practices to protect these dolphins? I think you've sort of touched on it before, but...
Yeah, so late last year, let's see, those submissions were due, the deadline for the submissions was the end of August. And then people were saying kind of, you know, optimistically, hopefully, that they would like to present a final advice paper. So the next step would be that the people at MPI, Ministry for Primary Industries, and DOC prepare a final advice paper to the ministers, those two ministers. And so they would say, well, out of the 4 options in the threat management plan, these are the ones, you know, everyone out there in the public wants option 4 or option 3 or whatever people voted for. And we, the government officials, think you should choose this option because. And then a few weeks later, we might have had a decision from the 2 ministers. So that was expected late last year. Then a week or two before Christmas, a message went out to these stakeholder groups saying there will be an announcement about the threat management plan in the coming months. And I read this at first to mean there will be a decision in the coming months, but it's not quite so clear. And then, of course, COVID happened, and so I imagine all bets are off as to when this is going to happen. But the only thing that needs to happen at this point is for DOC and MPI to analyse the submissions, which presumably they've done already, to make their advice to the two ministers of conservation and fisheries, and then for those two ministers to make a decision. And I think it has to go to cabinet for that decision to be, those two ministers would make that recommendation to the cabinet rather than just the two ministers deciding. I think it's the whole cabinet that decides. So there's a few steps to be taken, but none that you would expect to take an awfully long time.